This is the Empty Chair Protocol, a deep space story unlike any other. In a galaxy ruled by rules, where every council seat is filled with power, there is one chair that remains untouched and terrifying. This is the story of how humanity, strange and unpredictable, became the only force the galaxy dared not provoke. Expect mystery. Expect tension. Expect moments that will make you pause and wonder, what are we really capable of when we're not trying to fit in? Now take a breath. Let the stars fade in. And listen closely, because this is the protocol that changed everything. The chamber of the Seventh War assembly hummed with soft kinetic light, each panel on the curved obsidian walls pulsing in rhythm with the galaxy's strategic nerve center. Delegates from over 50 civilizations took their seats, their shapes and voices overlapping in a symphony of nervous diplomacy. The scent of ionized metal mixed with the sterile crispness of filtration systems, hanging heavy over the room like a prelude to war. At the center of the crescent-shaped table stood an empty chair, high-backed, silver inlaid, unclaimed for over 70 cycles. The lights above it were deliberately brighter, almost reverent, drawing the eye no matter where you sat. It was too ornate, too deliberate. It wasn't just furniture. It was memory carved in alloy. A low chime echoed. The Galaxium Council had entered formal session. High Chancellor Lysara raised her translucent hand, her crystalline frame refracting the room's tension like a prism. "We convene under Protocol Umbra," she said. "Agenda: escalating incursions by the Dominion of Terrans along Andrus coalition borders. But first, acknowledgement." A pause. All eyes turned, as if compelled by instinct or caution, toward the chair that no one dared approach. Not even the custodial drones touched it. It stood as it always had, waiting, accusing, unsettling. The silence stretched. Then Admiral Draven, tall, armored in jet-toned bioloi, broke the stillness with a quiet exhale. He didn't speak. He just looked, and that was enough to tighten every throat in the chamber. Envoy Kirill, young and new, fidgeted beside his station. His 4 eyes darted between the chair and the blinking diplomatic data feeds. He leaned toward Ambassador Celerix, whispering through a static veil. "It's just a tradition, right? A symbol." Celerix's membrane flickered a shade darker, a signal of restrained disquiet. "You'll find a galaxy rarely wastes space on empty symbols." Varnex arrived late, sweeping into the chamber like a solar flare in robes of command-threaded crimson. Without ceremony, he took his place and spoke aloud, not to anyone in particular, but to the air that felt increasingly heavier. "How many cycles must we pretend that superstition belongs in strategy?" His voice crackled through the room like dry lightning. "We face encroachment from Therax, fractured trade routes, and escalating disobedience from the Virex Directorate. And still we bow to an absence." No one answered him. Not yet, because the chair had already spoken, by refusing to vanish, by surviving every regime shift, council restructure, and cultural reformation. It remained, and somehow, its emptiness filled the chamber more than any presence could. Supreme Stratigar Varnex had never been one for patience, especially when cloaked in ceremony. He stood abruptly, his crimson command robe flaring as if reacting to his mood. The collective murmur of the chamber dimmed under the weight of his 6-limbed posture, a stance honed over a dozen military campaigns and enough strategic victories to earn him both respect and fear. "Enough," he said, voice cutting clean through the atmosphere like a plasma blade. "We waste time." Again, his gaze swept across the delegates, glowing, pulsating, scaled, furred, crystalline, all unified by a single ritual that, in his eyes, bordered on delusion. "We are the Seventh War Assembly," he continued, stalking slowly toward the edge of the central platform. "Our enemies adapt. Our borders thin. And what do? Begin every session by paying silent homage to a species that doesn't even show up." All eyes once again slid, unwillingly, toward the empty chair. "You call it Protocol Umbra. I call it tactical cowardice," Varnex spat. "The Terrans are unpredictable, yes. But the entire point of military command is to mitigate unpredictability. You do not plan around myth. You master it. Celerix interjected, calm but unyielding. No mit, estrategar. Just history. Documented. Unresolved. Varnex turned toward her, antennae flicking in mild contempt. Ambassador Celerix, with due respect, your race dissolves into gelatinous stasis when overstimulated. Forgive me if I do not take strategic lessons from a species whose defense mechanism is to melt. The insult landed hard. Several delegates emitted audible pulses of disapproval, but Celerix merely shimmered. In your race, Stratagar has lost 3 colonies trying to master what it didn't understand. That silenced him for a breath. Envoy Kirill, still adjusting to the rhythms of high diplomacy, leaned into his datapad, nervously scrolling through summaries of past incidents. Stratagar, he said hesitantly, what exactly would you propose we do with the chair? Varnex's mandibles flexed. Remove it. Dismantle the theater. Force clarity. We cannot prepare for war while honoring ghosts. Admiral Draven stirred. And what will you put in its place? Varnex paused. No answer came. Because that was the heart of the matter, wasn't it? The chair was more than a symbol. It was a question, an unsolved variable in every tactical equation. A seat reserved for an entity that had, time and again, shattered projections not by power, but by perception. We're not afraid of the Terrans, Varnex growled. We're afraid of not knowing what they'll do next. That is not strategy. That is fear. And fear should not run this chamber. But deep down, in the silence that followed, even Varnex knew, fear had already built that chair. And fear had ensured it was never left out again. Ambassador Celerix did not rise. She never needed to. Her voice, though soft, moved like current through plasma, subtle, penetrating, and impossible to ignore. I've spoken to them, she began, her bioluminescent membrane dimming to a deep, contemplative hue. Not in formal channels, of course, but in moments, accidental or carefully allowed. A few heads turned. You met a Terran? Kirill asked, his voice edged with disbelief. No, Celerix said simply. Worse. One met me. The chamber stilled. It was 12 cycles ago, she continued, her gaze distant, as though seeing through the walls of the war assembly. A diplomatic outpost on the fringe of the Signaris expanse. My team was studying trade behavior among newly contacted species. We had just begun cataloging patterns when a small freighter docked without clearance. Admiral Draven leaned forward. They claimed mechanical issues. Nothing unusual, but something felt disjointed. The way they moved. Spoke. Laughed. She let the word hang there. Laughed. It was not a common behavior in war councils. I attempted a simple scan, just a biological surface profile. Nothing intrusive. It failed. Not jammed. Not blocked. Failed. Varnex exhaled sharply, clearly unimpressed. Perhaps your equipment was faulty. Celerix didn't blink. I thought so too, until they approached me directly, smiled, and said, Don't worry, Ambassador. We fail all the time. It's how we get good at things. Murmurs rippled through the delegates. Was it a threat? Kirill asked, eyes wide. No, Celerix replied. It was worse. It was honest. Her membrane flickered again, this time tinged with blue-gray, Celerix's species equivalent of unease. They stayed 12 hours, shared nothing of value, took nothing of value. And yet, after they left, we discovered 3 anomalies. One of our trade simulation models had been altered, improved. One of our encrypted channels had been rebalanced for efficiency. And a plant in our botanical archive, thought sterile, had begun to bloom. She looked around. We never found evidence they accessed anything. Not a fingerprint, not a trace. Just outcomes. Quiet, helpful, and entirely unrequested. Varnex scoffed. Hardly a basis for policy. And yet, she said softly, I've never forgotten the feeling. That they could have done far worse, but didn't. That they saw everything, and chose only to nudge. She turned toward the empty chair. They're not just unpredictable, Stratagar. They're intentional. That's what unsettles me most. High Chancellor Lysara stood slowly, the soft resonance of her crystalline joints chiming like distant wind chimes in a frozen valley. All conversation fell silent, not out of protocol, but out of reverence. Lysara rarely spoke unless what she carried was too heavy to leave unsaid. The first time the chair appeared, she began, her voice glass-clear but heavy. It wasn't ceremonial. It was reactive. She stepped down from the platform, walking in a slow arc around the assembly, her radiant form casting kaleidoscopic reflections across the walls. It was after Arkan, she continued. After the Drax Confederacy miscalculated. A chill moved through the room. Even Varnex didn't interrupt. They thought the Terrans were primitive, obsessive, obvious. So they began extracting quarite from beneath Arkan's surface. The Confederacy assumed the red rock was just a symbol to the humans. Something poetic, something nostalgic. She stopped near the empty chair and looked at it, as if it were a former friend. But then the humans landed. Not a fleet, not a government envoy, just a small vessel, patched together with technologies no sane engineer would approve of. They stepped out in suits that barely held atmosphere. And they deliver a message. One sentence, written in over 30 languages, some of them ours. She turned to face the assembly. This is ours. You may leave now. Ambassador Celerix bowed her head slightly. Even she had only heard fragments of the true account. Lysara's voice dropped. The Draxian overseer didn't comply. He invoked galactic mineral rights and called for reinforcements. A long pause. They responded with mathematics, she said softly. A proof, simple but undeniable, showing exactly how long it would take for their device, a crude fission bomb, to destroy the entire facility and how many seconds the Draxians had to evacuate. The silence in the chamber deepened. They left in record time. No bloodshed, no warning shots, just precision and intent. She gestured to the chair. When we reconvened after the incident, a delegate from the Proxery placed this very seat at the table. No discussion, no proposal, just a chair and a note for Solara, in case they decide to come back. Varnex's expression darkened. And we just let it stay? No, Lysara said. We tried to remove it. 3 times. Once, the Council AI crashed for 8 minutes. Another time, our translation network desynced mid-session. The 3rd time, a delegate from the Seftar Empire began coughing uncontrollably until the chair was returned. She stepped back on her platform, the reflections from her body flickering with conviction. We stopped questioning it after that. Not because we believed it was enchanted, but because we realized we were the ones who changed. The chair simply reminded us how. Admiral Draven had been silent until now, his armored form a monument of restraint. But as Lysara's final words echoed into quiet, he shifted, just slightly, and every officer at the table took notice. There's something I never logged, he said, his voice low and gravel-edged, like stones grinding beneath ancient pressure. He rose slowly. Though his armor gleamed with the polish of ceremony, his posture was that of a soldier still haunted by the battlefield. I was there, he continued, when we investigated Proxerus. Kirill turned toward him with a flick of his multi-pupiled gaze. The disappearance? Draven nodded once. Yes, 137 vessels. Over 3,000 crew. Gone. No straged. No alarms. Just silence. His eyes, deep-set in metallic gold, locked on the empty chair. But there was one thing I've never told anyone, not even in the redacted reports. The chamber tensed, and even Varnex looked up. We boarded the command vessel first. The scans were clear. Power normal. Hull pristine. Life support active. No signs of conflict. No atmospherichis. It was eerie, like a ghost ship built yesterday. He exhaled through his vents. We expected signs of panic. Logs. Last-minute transmissions. But the crew quarters looked like people had just stepped away. Half-eaten meals, hollow games still playing, uniforms laid out. But no people. Draven took a step closer to the empty chair. His voice dropped to a hush. We found a datapad, left on the command console. Not encrypted, not hidden, just waiting. The room was deathly still. It contained a video file, he said. Standard galactic format. Noti me stamp. It showed the bridge, exactly as we found it. But in the video, the crew was there. Moving, smiling, working. He paused. Then they turned, one by one, toward the camera. Not startled, not angry, just watching, as if they knew we would see it. And then, in unison, they all said the same phrase. Draven's voice, for the first time in years, trembled. Still watching. Are you? Gasps echoed through the chamber. Lysara's crystalline limbs drew in close to her body, refracting fractured light. Celerix's membrane dimmed into a deep indigo. Even Varnix blinked. I destroyed the file, Draven said. Wiped it from every system, every backup node. Not from fear of what it showed, but because the moment I saw it, I felt watched. He turned toward the seat again. We keep the chair, not out of superstition. We keep it because something keeps watching us. And in the silence that followed, the lights above the chair flickered. Just once, just briefly. Enough to make every heart skip in perfect synchrony. Overseer Kozrek had never set foot on Arkan before the operation began. He hadn't needed to. The Red World was sterile, wind-scraped, and as far as the Drax Confederacy was concerned, vacant. To Kozrek, it was nothing more than a logistics waypoint, another dusty rock with exploitable minerals and no meaningful opposition. And most importantly, rich veins of korite buried beneath its crust. The extraction plan was meticulous on paper. 12 subterranean drills, 7 orbital freighters, a rotating crew of 600, most of whom would never even step outside the automated facility. Efficiency was paramount, discretion secondary. After all, the Terrans, what did they call themselves, humans, had barely managed a proper fusion drive. And that had been decades ago. According to the Stellar Survey Corps, Solara was a system best marked observation only. Curious, perhaps, but contained. So Kozrek approved the dig. Quietly, confidently. Within a week, drilling began. Within 2, they'd already struck dense korite clusters, more concentrated than projections had anticipated. Excitement spread through the operations command level. Bonuses were pre-approved. Timelines shortened. Kozrek prepared his commendation speech. No one noticed the static at first. A faint hum on shortwave bands. Background anomaly, the engineers called it. Solar interference. Arkan's weak magnetosphere played tricks sometimes. It wasn't until a shadow moved across the southern sky, low and fast, that someone finally reported it. Security footage captured the arrival. A single, patchwork vessel descending at an angle no safety protocol would have allowed. It had no clearance, no identificación beacon, and it landed without ceremony, directly atop Extraction Platform 3. The outpost command AI requested confirmation of friendly status. It received silence. Then, 32 seconds later, every monitor in the facility flickered. The video feed from Platform 3 activated without prompt. 15 figures in pressure suits emerged, their gait loose, imprecise. Human gravity adaptation. Kozrek recognized it from old footage. The lead figure stepped forward, holding something absurdly primitive in both hands, a physical tablet. Security drones scanned the device and found no threat signatures, just static. But when Kozrek ordered a manual override to decode the tablet's content, the screen filled with a message written in 37 languages, including Unified Galactic. This is ours. You may leave. Kozrek stared at the screen for several full seconds before laughing. Not in amusement, but in disbelief. The Confederacy had dealt with territorial disputes before. Pirates, scavenger tribes, even fringe mining syndicates. But this was theater, a show of misplaced bravado from a backwater species too proud to know its place. He dismissed the warning, and in doing so, he made the mistake that would become legend. Not because it led to war, but because it didn't. What followed wasn't a battle. It wasn't even a standoff. It was a demonstration, one the galaxy would never forget. The landing should have been a disaster. By all measurable standards, the Terran vessel shouldn't have survived atmospheric entry. Its hull was a patchwork of scrap-grade alloys, visibly mismatched heat plating, and what looked suspiciously like ceramic kitchen tiles. The flight path was erratic, the angle too steep, the descent uncontrolled. But it landed, if one could call a controlled skid into a mining platform a landing, without losing a single crew member. The platform's automated defenses scanned the intruders. No heavy weapons, no advanced shielding. Their suits weren't even sealed to proper specs. One of them had duct tape running down the arm. And yet, no one moved to stop them. The lead Terran stepped forward. His gait was confident, casual even. A second figure followed, dragging what appeared to be a large cylindrical object behind them, jury-rigged from reactor casings and stripped engine cores. The rest of the group fanned out without speaking, observing the perimeter like they were inspecting a newly purchased property. Overseer Kozrek watched from the command deck, transfixed. His first instinct had been to order containment protocols, but something in their posture, something he couldn't quantify, stayed his command. Then a message came. The tablet. The multilingual threat. This is ours. You may leave. Kozrek ordered a comms patch-in. No response. He dispatched an envoy drone to deliver formal documentation of Draxian mineral rights. The drone never returned. Instead, it was neatly returned to the pad 10 minutes later, carrying a crudely painted symbol of a frowning cartoon face and a sticky note that simply read, "No, thank you." The absurdity of it nearly broke protocol. Some of the younger crew laughed nervously. Kozrek did not. Within the hour, the Terrans had deployed strange ground beacons around the facility. They weren't transmitting anything discernible, just repeating a simple harmonic tone. Security AI flagged the pattern as mathematically significant, but failed to identify its purpose. Internal translators dubbed it a harmonic warning system, though no species had used such tactics in centuries. Kozrek sent another team to approach them, unarmed, diplomatic. The Terrans didn't react. They didn't speak. They merely stood, silent and still, as the Dracian delegates approached. At 20 meters, the cylinder one of them had been carrying lit up with a faint blue glow. A screen flickered to life on its surface, hand-assembled, unshielded, and on it, a countdown. No context, no demand, just a simple line of Terran numerals ticking downward. Kozrek froze. "Stand down," he ordered his team. "Do not proceed." Then he watched as the Terrans, still saying nothing, gathered at the edge of the platform and sat. Saturday, like they were having a picnic. The message was clear. They weren't negotiating. They weren't afraid. They weren't even trying to escalate. This wasn't military bravado. This was confidence. Improvised. Unpolished. Inarguable. Kozrek had prepared for insurgency. Sabotage. Protest. He had not prepared for Terrans who brought a bomb to a meeting and had the nerve to sit cross-legged beside it like it was a pet dog. It wasn't war. It was a dare. And the galaxy would spend decades trying to understand how a group of under-equipped Terrans had just seized an entire extraction site by showing up with nothing but intent. There are many ways to win a confrontation: force, diplomacy, deception. The Terrans, it turned out, had mastered fourth math. 36 hours after the unauthorized landing on Arkin, Overseer Kozrek initiated full-scale tactical analysis. Recon drones circled the occupied platform. Signal sniffers scanned every channel. Linguistic algorithms parsed the countdown display in real time. But the numbers remained unyielding. No message, no change, just a silent march toward zero. And still, the Terrans waited. Kozrek assembled his command team. Engineers, tactical AI operators, crisis negotiators. They pored over the device footage, trying to determine if the cylinder was a bluff. It had no signature of known explosive materials, no antimatter containment, no plasma surge coils. But it did have a power cell, old, unstable, and undeniably volatile. Someone in the room said what no one wanted to hear. If they're bluffing, they're doing it with a bomb that might not be a bluff. Still, Kozrek hesitated to evacuate. Surrendering to primitives would stain the Confederacy's image for cycles. So he bought time. He opened a secure channel. The Terrans answered. The feed came online, static-laced and visually poor, as though broadcast through equipment stolen from a junkyard. The figure that appeared wasn't armored, wasn't uniformed. They wore a patch flight suit and had hair that stood at odd angles from what looked like a personal static field failure. They smiled. No introduction, no formal address, just a quiet nod and a sudden upload. Within seconds, the Draxian comms terminal blinked as a data package arrived. No virus, no hidden payload, just a file. It was titled, Evacuation Probability. You have 12 minutes. Kozrek opened it, expecting nonsense. Instead, what he found was a mathematically elegant proof, built on principles both familiar and distinctly Terran. It began with their knowledge of Draxian facility layout, estimated crew count, escape pod launch speeds. Then came the calculations of blast radius, thermal dispersion, and structural impact, all mapped out in chilling precision. But that wasn't the worst part. The final section displayed simulations, visual, color-coded, terrifyingly calm. One by one, the projections showed which staff members would survive based on varying evacuation speeds, and where the bodies would be found if they didn't. The file concluded with a message written in unified galactic. We don't want to hurt anyone, but we will. Please choose wisely. Kozrek stared at the display as if it might vanish. This wasn't terrorism. It wasn't even coercion. It was accounting, merciless, meticulous, and impossible to argue with. His second-in-command whispered, "They built this in under 2 days. From our schematics." Kozrek responded flatly. They must have had help. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. The Terrans hadn't hacked into the system. They had observed, listened, understood, and then turned that understanding into a tool sharper than any blade. The certainty of logic. Kozrek sat in silence for several minutes. His options were limited and shrinking. He could attempt to storm the platform. But even if the bomb was fake, the Terrans had proven their calculations were not. Any failure would end in catastrophe. He could delay further, but the countdown ticked on, a drumbeat of inevitability. So he made a call, one that would haunt him long after Arkan. Begin phased withdrawal, he said quietly. Start with outer crew stations. Rotate shifts to evacuate. No alerts. No panique. His officers hesitated. But sir, Kozrek didn't look up. We're not surrendering. We're avoiding subtraction. They didn't call it an evacuation. Officially, it was logged as a temporary systems recalibration and personnel redistribution exercise. But in reality, every member of the Drax Confederacy crew on Arkan knew exactly what it was. Retreat. It began quietly. One shift at a time, support staff were rotated off-duty and shuttled to orbital stations for routine reassessment. No sirens. No alarms. No emergency beacons. Just clipped orders and tight-lipped supervisors. Kozrek had insisted on silence, not to protect morale, but to preserve dignity. The Terrans never interfered. They remained exactly where they had landed, on Platform 3, sitting, sometimes pacing, occasionally swapping stories through their suit radios. Their countdown ticked lower and lower. No demands. No escalation. Just patience. Within 2 Earth days, only essential command remained on site. Kozrek stayed longer than protocol required, watching from his high observation deck as the final shuttles departed. Below, the Terrans had begun taking light readings of the surrounding soil, like scientists on a calm field trip. There was no gloating, no declaration of victory, and that disturbed him most of all. When the final withdrawal order came, Kozrek didn't argue. He walked the halls alone, past vacant labs, idle mining rigs, untouched rec rooms. Everything was still intact. No sabotage, no looting. It was as if the Terrans had never wanted the facility itself, just the acknowledgement that it didn't belong to the Draxians. By the time Kozrek stepped onto the last shuttle, the countdown had reached midnight. Nothing exploded. There was no threat anymore. It had served its purpose. But the humiliation, that lingered. And so, like most powerful empires with wounded pride, the Drax Confederacy responded the only way it knew how, by covering it up. Official reports claimed structural instability had endangered the facility. The Terran presence was classified as local planetary anomaly with negligible strategic value. No mention was made of the tablet, the countdown, or the mathematical proof that had paralyzed their entire chain of command. Even within the Galaxium Council, the story that circulated was sanitized. Some whispered rumors, a few raised questions, but without evidence, without public footage or battle logs, there was little to investigate. And the Terrans? They left Arkin shortly after. No kalini, no banner, no claim filed in the interstellar archives. Just silence. They didn't need a treaty. They had made their point. And somewhere, in the minds of every Draxian officer who had served on Arkin, one thought echoed like radiation in deep space. They could have destroyed us, but they didn't. Long after the last Draxian shuttle departed Arkin, the transmission logs remained quiet. No retaliation orders. No diplomatic protests. No media outrage. Just silence. The Galaxium Council, ever watchful, had quietly flagged the incident. Not officially, not in the ledgers of interstellar governance, but in back channels, private nodes, and encrypted message bursts. Word began to circulate. The Terrans had done something. Again, at first, the reports conflicted. Some claimed the humans had deployed a new kind of energy weapon. Others insisted it was a psychological warfare, untraceable but devastating. But as the stories were traded between analysts, military strategists, and intelligence officers, one truth became inescapable. The Drax Confederacy had abandoned an operationally successful Korite facility without firing a single shot. That should have been impossible. And yet it happened. What followed wasn't panic, but recalibration. War colleges in the Seftar Empire requested copies of Draxian protocols for review. The Virex Directorate ordered a full audit of their own extraction plans near Sol System. Even the Hexer Sovereignty, normally dismissive of soft conflict, added a new submodule to their officer training, non-kinetic hostility scenarios, case study Solara. But the most unsettling response came from Galaxium's Internal Strategic Bureau. They commissioned a classified psychological dossier titled simply, Terran Cognitive Combat Tendencies Initial Assessment. The report was never released in full, but excerpts made their way through the whispernets. It described the Terrans not as aggressive nor advanced, but as deeply asymmetrical. Their strength, the report argued, came not from technology, but from their refusal to think like anyone else. They weaponized unpredictability. They embraced chaos. They didn't escalate. They tilted the board. And worst of all, they rarely acted out of ambition. They acted out of conviction. There was no negotiating with that. Not with leverage, not with bribes, not even with overwhelming force. The final page of the dossier contained just one sentence. Do not test them twice. In the years that followed, that phrase became an unofficial maxim among military tacticians throughout the galaxy. It was muttered in war rooms, printed on unauthorized merchandise, and eventually etched in low orbit above Arkin itself, on a discreet satellite placed there by unknown hands. A reminder. They came. They warned. They left. And that was enough. It started with a missed ping. A routine systems check from the Proxorus forward fleet, 137 ships under the Hexer Sovereignty, failed to deliver its hourly transmission. A hiccup, nothing more. The region was known for intermittent gravitational interference. Comms traffic had hiccup before, but then the second check missed. And the third. By the fourth silence, the Galaxium Strategic Relay began logging anomalies. The fleet's beacon signals, normally steady pulses of location, orientation, and power flow, flickered once, then disappeared altogether. Not jammed, not disrupted, gone. Within the hour, 5 separate intelligence branches submitted urgent reports. Within the day, the whispers began. By the end of the cycle, Admiral Draven was summoned. He didn't ask questions. Not first. He had learned over the cycles that when command summoned him, personally, it wasn't for routine. It was because something had gone very, very wrong. Recon only, they said. Non kinetic. Observe and report. He brought 3 ships. Old patrol vessels. Fast and underarmed. Intentionally unthreatening. The kind of presence one sends when you don't want to seem like you're responding to a crisis. But Draven knew. This was a crisis. Only no one wanted to admit it yet. The Proxorus system emerged through the view screen like a memory. One yellow star for gas giants, scattered debris rings, and a single orbital path lined with shadows. Ships. Hexer ships. Exactly where they were supposed to be. Exactly as they had reported 23 cycles ago. Draven stood in silence at the command rail, his hands folded tight behind his back. Any movement? None, his comms officer replied. No energy spikes. No thruste signatures. Minimal life support draw. Ambient heat at expected levels. Systems appear dormant. Dormant wasn't the right word. Dormant implied sleep. This was something else. They approached slowly, running passive scans. One by one, the ships came into full visual clarity, sleek hexer design, matte obsidian hulls with bioluminescent sigils glowing faintly under the light of Proxorus's sun. There were no breach marks, no escorchtrals, no signs of attack, but also no response, no halignaliment, no defense activation, no life. They're still powered, his engineer noted. Internal systems stable. Environmental control is running. Draven didn't blink, and yet they don't answer. He ordered boarding parties prepped. Cautious, staggered entries. Each team equipped with both biosensors and neural dampeners. Whatever this was, he didn't want his crew falling into the same silence. His own boots clanked on the deck plating of the command vessel, Hexer flagship Salanther. The air was breathable. Lights still glowed along the corridors. Console panels flickered softly. A soothing chime echoed every 6 seconds, a standard Hexer ambient calibration tone. But the halls were empty. Crew stations were manned by absence. Chairs pushed back, meals uneaten, a coffee mug still steaming. They reached the bridge. The captain's cloak still hung beside the command rail. A tactical hologram still rotated lazily in standby mode. But not a single soul remained. No signs of struggle. No sign of mass ejection. No emergency beacons. No activati de escapepals. It was as though 3,000 Hexer had simply stepped away. One officer on Draven's team spoke, voice hushed as if the ship might hear them. They didn't leave in a hurry. Draven agreed. He could feel it. They weren't taken. They weren't killed. They simply vanished. A whisper of cold prickled at the back of his neck. He had stood in the ruins of war-torn moons. He had marched through bloody decks and collapsed strongholds. But this was worse. This was untouched. Pull the teams, he said quietly. We're not here to wake ghosts. As they withdrew from the fleet, the comms team filed their final report. Draven read the last line twice before sending it up the chain. All ships accounted for. Systems nominal. Crew missing. No known cause. And deep in his gut, beneath all logic and training, a quiet dread took root. Because fleets don't just fall silent. Not unless someone, or something, tells them to. The second sweep began with tighter formations, stricter containment protocols, and less optimism. Admiral Draven didn't rely on gut instinct alone, but his gut had been whispering something ever since he first stepped onto the Hexer flagship Salanther. This wasn't abandonment. This was something else. The fleet floated exactly as recorded in the last report. Motionless, perfectly aligned, glistening with the clean geometry of military precision. From a distance, the formation was flawless. From within, it was wrong, like a painting hung just slightly off-center. It looked right, until you stared long enough to realize something in your subconscious was screaming at you to stop looking. Draven assigned new boarding teams, rotating personnel, pairing seasoned engineers with xenobehavioral analysts and emergency response medics. Every group carried neurocortical stabilizers, atmospheric recording equipment, and constant uplinks to the command ship. If anything so much as twitched, they were pulling out. He himself led the boarding of the second ship, the Varnex Prime, a command cruiser with a crew manifest of 340. They breached the airlock in silence. Inside, they found cleanliness. No blood, no scratches, no defensive systems tripped. The atmosphere was untouched, freshly recycled, even a degree warmer than standard Hexer comfort settings. Internal sensors showed movement, but it was only mechanical. Automated servos, idle cleaning drones, a utility bot scooting in slow circles down an empty hallway like a child's forgotten toy. And again, no crew. Their belongings remained. Clothing folded neatly. Personal devices left on nightstands. One room had a musical hollow suite still playing a Hexer opera. Soft, sorrowful, rising toward a crescendo that never came. Draven examined the med bay. He found injections mid-prep. One was still in the actuator, as if a medic had stepped away for only a moment. Everywhere he looked, he saw life interrupted, not ended. That's what disturbed him most. If they had died, there would be signs. If they had fled, there would be chaos. But here, everything remained in order, as if some unseen force had paused reality and quietly removed all variables involving people. On the sixth vessel, one of the engineers, a grizzled Torvani named Asher, found something new. In the engine room, behind a maintenance panel no one ever checked unless systems failed, he discovered a handheld datapad. Hexer's standard issue, coated in fine dust. Draven reviewed its contents personally. There were personal logs, mundane things, maintenance schedules, complaints about recycled food flavors, notes on a long-distance relationship with someone stationed near Valtris Lane. But the final entry stood out. We saw it again last night. Through the viewport. It's hard to describe. Not a ship, not a structure, just presence. I know how that sounds. Maybe it's fatigue. Maybe it's Solara messing with our heads. But I swear, the stars blinked wrong. Like something passed between them, and the light didn't know how to catch up. The room fell quiet. Later that cycle, another team found something stranger. In a mess hall of the Keth 7, a communal table had a pattern etched into its surface. Not carved, but scorched as though traced by invisible heat. The shape resembled a spiral, but not any known galactic symbol. Draven sent it back for analysis. The cryptographers would later compare it to Terran chaos equations. Fractal structures, unstable, unsolvable. At the end of the third day, Draven convened his officers. I want consensus, he said, though he already knew the answer. What happened here? His chief medical analyst shook their head. No pathogens, no toxins, no trauma. His lead engineer, power levels are stable. No overloads, no system malfunctions. His xenolinguist, softly, I don't think this was an accident. Silence. Then one of the younger officers, barely into her second tour, spoke what no one wanted to say. What if they were taken? Draven didn't respond. Not with words. Because deep down, he suspected it too. Only not taken. Removed. Like data clipped from a line of code. By the end of the investigation, all 137 ships had been boarded. All were in pristine condition. None showed any signs of struggle or distress. No black box recordings. No final transmissions. The Galaxium Council later described it as the cleanest mass disappearance in recorded galactic history. Draven used a different term, one that would never make into the official archives. Surgical erasure. The fleet was intact. The systems were alive. But the people? Gone. And somewhere, deep within the chill of Proxor's space, Draven felt the weight of something watching. Not from the outside, but from inside the silence itself. It happened as they were leaving. Admiral Draven had ordered the final sweep completed, his crew drained, tense, and visibly shaken after days of haunting discoveries. Every vessel had told the same story. No death, no flight, no damage. Only stillness and inexplicable absence. The Varnex Prime, Keth 7, Salanther, and over 100 others floated in eerie formation, like tombstones that refused to bury the dead. Draven stood on the bridge of his command cruiser, ready to withdraw. Then the lights flickered. Not the usual power fluctuation, not a ship issue. This flicker was synchronized. Across every screen, in every bay, on every deck, from sensor panels to wall displays, from private terminals to external hull readouts. They all blinked. Once. Then went black. And then, without warning, they lit up again. Every screen, every frequency, every device. No glitches, no graphics, no symbols. Just a sentence. We told you to check back later. The words weren't animated. They didn't pulse. They just were displayed in crisp, static text, rendered perfectly in unified galactic and in smaller sublines, translated into every major council-recognized language. No sound accompanied them. Just silence, profound and absolute. On Draven's bridge, the crew froze. For a long, breathless moment, no one spoke. Celerix, who was monitoring from a diplomatic relay station via long-range tether, reportedly dropped her glass membrane interface in shock. One of Draven's officers, a hardened veteran of the Swornexus front, muttered, "Who's we?" No one answered. Draven stared at the words. Not a threat, not a demand, not even a warning. A reminder. A chilling callback to the last time Solara made themselves known, back during the Arkan incident, when the directions received a similarly curt message. The phrasing was unmistakably Terran. Informal, yet final. Casual in tone, catastrophic in implication. Draven clenched his jaw. Are the ships broadcasting this, or is it embedded? The comms officer tapped furiously. It's not coming from the ships. He looked up, pale. It's coming from us, from our internal systems. Draven's blood went cold. They had been infected, not by code, not by intrusion, by presence. The message wasn't inserted. It had always been there, waiting, latent, as if the entire fleet had been primed as a relay, and the moment the Galaxium team stepped aboard, the message embedded itself inside their systems like a parasite with a timer. The Admiral gave the only command he could. Pull back. Now, as the cruisers began retreating from the Proxorus system, Draven sat back in his chair, silent. He'd seen Terran cleverness before, but this was something else. This was theater, performed for them at the precise moment it would make the deepest cut. No egrestion, no noise. Just a sentence designed to unmoor trust, sever confidence, and whisper one truth into every commander's mind. You don't understand us, and you never will. As Proxorus faded behind them, Draven closed the display. The message remained burned into his retinas. He didn't speak again for the rest of the cycle. He didn't need to. The words had said enough. 3 cycles passed. The Proxorus investigation was buried beneath layers of classified reports and silent stares. No theories held. No answers emerged. Some blamed faulty AI. Others whispered of dimensional breaches. Most just stopped talking about it altogether, until a single transport vessel drifted into the outer shipping lanes near Valtris Lane. Unregistered, unmarked, unclaimed. Its hull configuration didn't match any Hexa registry. No beacon code, no known propulsion signature. And yet, it docked at a neutral port with clean entry vectors and perfect gravitational sync, as if it knew exactly how the lane operated. Inside, 3,246 Hexer crew members were found. Alive, unharmed, and utterly confused. Port authorities, stunned into disbelief, initiated emergency triage procedures. Medical scans confirmed the impossible. Every individual matched the DNA profiles of the missing personnel from Proxorus. Their physiology was stable. No signs of trauma. No foreign implants. Not a scratch on them. They looked well. Better than well, actually. Several showed signs of improved cellular regeneration. Reduced age indicators. Enhanced neuroplasticity. But their memories? Gone. Each of them remembered working aboard their respective ships, logging routine system checks, drinking CAF in the galley. Then nothing. A blank stretch of absence, like a book with the middle pages torn out. Their next moment of awareness had been waking aboard this strange vessel, orbiting near friendly territory, with no alarms or explanation. The Galaxium Council demanded immediate lockdown, but no force fields are necessary. The Hexer crew didn't want to run. They wanted to understand. So did everyone else. Security teams combed the transport vessel. It had no official design, no clear power source, and no manufacturer tags. Its corridors were functional, sterile, but oddly cozy, as if someone had studied various alien interiors and picked the most pleasant elements from each. No weapon systems, no command bridge, just a guidance module with preset coordinates, one of which had landed them right in a safe, neutral orbit. The log showed one route. A path. One that had passed every major Hexer colony, every outpost, every family node connected to the missing crew. The transport had dropped them off near their homes. Silently. Perfectly. One by one. Like returning borrowed books. Then it had set itself on a final course, into neutral space, where it simply waited to be found. When the analysts ran the full simulation, their results were more terrifying than enlightening. The trip, if done conventionally, would have taken nearly 5 cycles. The crew had only been missing for 3. Either time had been around the ship, or it had been around them. Galaxium analysts floated every possibility. Advanced warp tunneling, temporal folding, borrowed slipspace tech. But none of the theories explained the other anomaly. The language embedded into the ship's navigation logs. It wasn't Hexer. It wasn't any council-registered script. But the base logic, the sequencing, the symmetry, the compression algorithm, matched something disturbingly familiar. Terran, or more precisely, Terran-inspired. Even that term sparked debate. Could humans even design something like this? If so, why? And if not, then who had? On their behalf? Back at Central Intelligence, a linguistics officer translated the final embedded marker in the ship's log. Just one line, carved into a slim metallic plate near the exit bay. Subtle, elegant, as if it had been there the entire time, waiting to be noticed. It read, "Delivery complete. Welcome home. No sender. No signature. Just intention." The press was never informed. The council classified the event under Omega Seal. But within inner military circles, a phrase began circulating again, whispered like a ghost returned from exile. Solara. The name had become a riddle, a threat, a reverent curse. They didn't ask for thanks. They didn't explain. They didn't take credit. They simply returned what was never theirs to keep. And in doing so, they left behind something more disruptive than fear. Gratitude. The kind that makes powerful governments lose sleep. Because it's easy to prepare for an enemy who wants your territory. But no one's ever prepared for a force that's already inside your trust. The transport ship that returned the Hexer crew should have been the breakthrough. After all, it was intact, its systems operational, its interior pristine. It didn't cloak itself, didn't flee. It simply floated near Valtris Lane, broadcasting nothing, its engines humming at a perfect, unchanging frequency. If the galaxy ever hoped to understand what had happened to Proxorus, this vessel, silent, patient, waiting, was the closest thing to a confession they'd ever receive. So they took it apart, carefully. At first, engineers approached it like any other unknown artifact, mapping internal compartments, tagging energy signatures, testing material composites. But the deeper they went, the stranger it became. The hull plating was a fusion of alloys no lab could replicate. Not because they were exotic, but because they were contradictory. Multiple layers behaved like separate types of metals simultaneously. Some parts responded to radiation. Others seemed to store kinetic impact, like memory foam. When one panel was removed, another panel a few meters away adjusted its weight. Sensors burned out, trying to model the interior logic of the wiring. Half of it appeared purely analog. Copper, ceramic insulators, soldered boards, and the other half behaved like quantum latticework, blinking through localized phase shifts without any power draw. There were no control interfaces, no command deck, no pilot's chair, just a continuous network of interlinked nodes running on programming languages no AI had seen before. And yet the diagnostic tools described them as remarkably clean, like child-proof code. But the strangest discovery came from the propulsion module. Its core registered as null. Not zero, not inactive. Null. It didn't emit energy. It didn't absorb it. It simply existed as a placeholder in space, an object that refused to identify itself as an object. The few who examined it directly described feeling lightheaded, as if their sense of distance and presence slipped sideways. One technician vomited when she stared at it for too long. The Galaxium Intelligence Directorate convened 3 independent teams to review the data. All 3 submitted variations of the same phrase. We don't know how it works, only that it works for them. And then, On the fifth day of analysis, the ship sent a message. Not through sound, not through code, but by act. It began to vibrate, gently, rhythmically, like a sigh. Panels folded inward. Modules unlatched and slid into themselves. Energy signatures faded, one by one. No heat spike, no explosión, just systematic, graceful collapse. Within 90 seconds, the entire vessel folded into a single silver orb, no larger than a grain of rice. It hovered midair for a moment, then vanished. No trail, no radiación, no explanación. Only one object remained, a plaque dislodged from the wall during the ship's implosion. It was rectangular, matte gray, with hand-inscribed glyphs etched deep into the surface. The translation took less than an hour. The message was simple. Courtesy of Solara. No receipt necessary. The military archives sealed the data under triple-tier clearance. But rumors always leak. Within cycles, the phrase had spread across the whisper nets of every intelligence agency in the galaxy. Some laughed. Others panicked. Most simply watched. And quietly, behind closed doors, the doctrine changed again. The galaxy no longer feared Terran weapons, or Terran warships, or even Terran intent. It feared Terran principles. Because a civilization that can build something like that, drop it into your territory, make it disappear at will, and then sign it like a gift, isn't looking for conquest. They're sending a message, not of dominance, but of design, a kind of authorship over chaos. Solara didn't need to be at the table. They were already editing the script. And from that day forward, the protocol Umbra wasn't just observed. It was obeyed. Operative Zelrin was, by every internal metric of the Seftar Empire, perfect, fluent in 23 dialects. Neural pathways modified for adaptive memory compression. Skinfold modulation for real-time mimicry. He had embedded himself inside ruling councils, rebel cells, and ancient cults without leaving so much as a whisper in the air behind him. Zelrin wasn't just invisible. He was culturally absorbent. Every mission completed. Every detail logged. No trace. That was before Solara. The directive had come from the very top. The Galaxium Council had refused to act. The Protocol Umbra was holding every war council in place like a superstition dressed up in policy. So the Seftar Empire made its own decision. Gather intelligence, quietly, before the humans pushed further into trade zones the Empire considered too close for comfort. Zelrin was chosen without debate. He spent 2 weeks preparing his Terran profile. Human male, mid-30s, mildly athletic but non-threatening. A digital history fabricated so convincingly that it fooled even the Solaran employment registries. He was Dylan Moreau, a logistics coordinator with a passion for organic gardening and indie jazz. He settled into a modest apartment in a mid-sized city near one of Solar's military research hubs. Surveillance devices planted. Contact points mapped. Behavioral norms studied and assimilated. He began transmitting weekly logs through a piggyback relay tied to Solar's commercial satellite grid. The first reports were precise and dry. Civilian defense network uncoordinated, energy grid outdated but stable, social cohesion unpredictable. But by month 2, the tone began to shift. Observation note. Local street food ecosystem surprisingly complex. Recommend cultural study of tacos. Month 3. Attended community karaoke night for cover. Target interaction compromised by emotional resonance of Terran music. Possible neurological side effect. By month 4, command began requesting tighter, more strategic detail. What they received instead was silence. Complete signal loss. No explanation. No evidence of capture, assassination, or burnout. Zelrin, Seftar's most decorated infiltration operative, had disappeared into Solara's civilian lair without a trace. At first, Seftar Command assumed the worst. Counterintelligence blackout, possibly aided by the Terrans' increasingly uncanny behavior patterns. Teams were assembled for recovery. But then came the blog. Not intercepted. Not hacked. Published. By Zelrin himself. Publicly. But that's a story of its own. For now, What mattered most to the Seftar Empire wasn't that they'd lost contact with their greatest spy. It was the dawning, slow, stomach-twisting realization that maybe he hadn't been compromised. Maybe, just maybe, he didn't want to come back. And deep inside Seftar Command, someone finally muttered what no one wanted to hear. What if this is worse than failure? What if it's fun? It arrived without warning. At precisely 7 o'clock Council Standard Time, every secure diplomatic terminal across the Galaxium Council, including those inside Seftar's black site war rooms, received a synchronized ping. No encryption. No malicious paluth. Just a single open access file titled, My Amazing Earth Vacation by Dylan Moreau. It was 42,000 words long. Attached were 183 images, 7 embedded videos, and a hand-drawn map of what appeared to be food truck locations across something called Austin. The metadata was undeniable. It came from Zelrin. The former Seftar operative, thought lost, compromised, or dead, had apparently become a blogger. The opening paragraph read, 6 months ago, I landed on Solara with the intent of studying their military infrastructure. What I found instead was a bustling weekend farmer's market, a sandwich called a Reuben, and something called stand-up comedy that made me question the very nature of authority. Within the first 10 pages, he had described his growing fascination with street performers, his deep emotional attachment to an abandoned cat he named General Paws, and his unsuccessful but earnest attempt to join a trivia team at a local bar. He included reviews of local restaurants, a brief essay on the psychology of drive-through culture, a passionate defense of something called breakfast tacos, which he ranked as the most diplomatically disarming cuisine in the known galaxy. He even included a recipe, his own. Somewhere around Chapter 7, he admitted to abandoning his mission entirely. I know I was sent to assess risk factors and locate defensive weak points. But honestly, I've never been happier. I've started learning the banjo. Last week, I cried during a movie about time-traveling robots. I'm not sorry. By Chapter 11, the tone shifted again. I've found purpose here. It's not espionage. It's not disruption. It's brisket. And the final entry. At least a food cart. I'm calling it Tex-Mex, a fusion of Seftar spice syntax and Terran comfort food. Grand opening is Thursday. You're all invited. First tacos free. There is a postscript, clearly not written by Zelrin. Simple, blunt, Terran style. Your spy is happy. We're keeping this one. Send more if you'd like. Results may vary. P.S. They make excellent nachos. Reactions across the council range from disbelief to horror. The Seftar Empire issued no official statement. Behind closed doors, their entire infiltration division was quietly shut down. Because if a top-level operative could not only be neutralized, but happily absorbed by Terran hospitality and spice blends, then what chance did strategic doctrine have? Somewhere on Solara, Zelrin, once the finest spy in the galaxy, was now standing behind a grill, flipping tortillas, and humming an Earth melody he couldn't quite translate, but didn't need to. Because the mission was over, and the food was really that good. Zelrin's blog wasn't just a sensation. It was a catalyst. Within 3 cycles of its release, unmarked diplomatic cruisers began quietly disappearing from standard routes. Operatives from at least 17 species, including Hexer Whisper agents, Virex deep tissue moles, and even a Swornexus drone node, simply vanished. They weren't abducted. They weren't neutralized. They defected. To Solara. It started with coded messages hidden in outdated comm channels. Following Miro's scent, trying the nachos, initiating Operation Retire and Chill. The Galaxium Council scrambled to respond, but by the time they realized what was happening, Earth had quietly become the galaxy's most effective defector magnet. Not through ideology, not through bribery, through cultural confusion. Agent Trevin of the Hexer vanished during a mission to observe Terran education systems. 2 months later, he resurfaced on an indie podcast about woodworking and mindfulness. His voice, once measured and cold, now laughed easily between ad reads for beard oil and artisan honey. A Swornexus cluster fragment, designated drone 771 Gamma, was last seen attempting to infiltrate a municipal power grid. It re-emerged in a viral dance video wearing roller skates and a hat. That video was later adapted into a Broadway musical. It won 4 Galactic Artistry Prizes. One Virex infiltration artist, renowned for orchestrating the collapse of 2 planetary governments, opened a small ceramic studio in Oregon. Their handcrafted espresso mugs are now sold across 7 systems. But the most outrageous story belonged to Agent Draxier, a draconian operative trained in 20 forms of silent assassination and 0 forms of human emotion. Assigned to monitor Earth's media landscape, Draxier became inexplicably obsessed with soap operas. Specifically, one called Hearts on Fire, the Ridgefield Saga. Not only did he binge the entire 30-year catalog, but he also submitted fan theories under the name BlazeFan1972 and joined multiple online forums where he argued passionately about whether Nathaniel was truly dead or just in disguise as his evil twin. Then, he made a move. Within a year, Agent Draxier became a consultant on the show. By year 2, he was head writer, and by year 3, he won a Terran Television Award for Best Plot Twist in a Daytime Drama for introducing a sentient washing machine that fell in love with the mayor. He now lives in a beach house. He refuses to return home. When approached by a Seftar retrieval team, his only message was, "You don't get it. It's not a soap opera. It's a mirror to the soul." The Galactic Concord eventually formed an internal report titled Cultural Saturation Incidents, Solara Case Studies. The final paragraph read, "Infiltration attempts must be reassessed. Traditional extraction methods ineffective. Subjects report elevated happiness, lower blood pressure, and a curious sense of belonging. Consider Class H behavior modeling for future ops." At the bottom of the page, someone had scribbled a note in pen. Also, binge watching isn't that bad. It was called the Scepter of Silence, a Nova Core deployment class warhead designed by the Virex Directorate to end planetary civilizations in one strike. It had no launch signature, no traceable energy output, no HFY. It simply appeared above cities, moons, or capitals and waited. This one was meant for Solara. The Virex had grown tired of the Terran anomaly, the Council's indecision, the psychological chaos, the memes. If diplomacy couldn't contain them, and espionage only made the problem worse, then logic demanded removal. They launched it during a meteor shower, clever masking, and watched as the scepter blinked out of phase and reappeared in low orbit above Solara's largest urban cluster. Right on schedule, but the world didn't end. Instead, the weapon disappeared again, and 3 seconds later, it reappeared above the Virex capital. It floated there, silent, unmoving, for 3 days. Panic consumed the Virex hierarchy. Emergency bunkers filled. Command protocols collapsed. Debates raged over whether the weapon had been compromised, hijacked, or was simply demonstrating something far worse. Intent. Every expert team confirmed the same terrifying detail. The warhead hadn't been tampered with. It had changed its own coordinates. No one knew how. There had never been evidence of Terran gravitational manipulation tech, phase-lock hacking, or autonomous quantum targeting. Yet the weapon's internal logs showed a new command line. Redirect target, origin source. On day 2, someone noticed the inscription. It wasn't etched, but burned into the outer casing, just beneath the warhead's primary shell. 3 words in Terran standard font. Try that again. No punctuación. No logo. No claim of authorship. Just a suggestion. The scepter finally vanished as mysteriously as it arrived. No detonation, no residual energy, no explanation. It simply blinked out of existence. Forever. The event sent shockwaves through military research divisions galaxy-wide. Virex officially declared it a localized quantum feedback malfunction. But internally, they decommissioned the entire Nova Core program within a month. No one wanted to build another scepter. No one wanted to see where it might end up. A black site document leaked weeks later hinted at classified conclusions. Solara doesn't just defy our models. It plays with them. Our worst weapons don't fail. They get redirected. Our worst fears don't explode. They float. And at the very bottom, one analyst scrawled a note by hand. Is this what they want us to feel? The Galaxium Council had long maintained a codex of species classifications, an ancient catalog developed over millennia to evaluate threats, alliances, and anomalies. Class A, fully allied species under the Concord. Class B, diplomatically stable, partially integrated. Class C, culturally divergent, minimal threat. Class D, hostile, under surveillance. Class X, unknown entities, often cosmic in origin. Class Z, non-sentient or biologically inert. But now, for the first time in 10,000 galactic cycles, a new classification was introduced. Class H. The H stood not for hierarchy or hostility. It stood for humans. The resolution was passed in a closed-door emergency session, with only 12 of the 21 seats occupied. The rest had declined to appear, citing stress, confusion, or recent personal awakenings involving Terran cinema. The language of the resolution was strange. Species exhibits radical unpredictability, emotional transduction, and recursive humor-based defense mechanisms. Attempts at manipulation result in assimilation. Attempts at destruction result in metaphysical embarrassment. Further attempts are strongly discouraged. Under the bolded Class H designation, 3 universal directives were listed. 1. Do not provoke. 2. Do not understand. 3. Do not engage. The third point sparked immediate backlash. Ambassador Celerix reportedly laughed out loud and demanded, "Then what the stars are we supposed to do with them?" High Chancellor Lysara simply answered, "Observe and prepare." Others weren't so calm. Supreme Stradigar Varnex stormed out halfway through the session, muttering about cosmic pranksters with barbecue sauce and nuclear potential. No one followed him. Behind the official classification, unspoken fears began to solidify. The Terrans weren't a threat in the traditional sense. They were a mirror to every civilization's certainties, to every system's hubris, to every algorithm's assumption. And maybe that's what made them so dangerous. They didn't follow the rules. They rewrote them, one meme at a time. It began without declaration, no demand, no broadcast, no ultimatum. Just silence followed by annihilation. The outer colonies along the Valtris lane blinked out of contact within 12 standard hours. Surveillance from the Stellar Survey Corps showed entire planetary grids, lights, power, biosignals, vanishing as if someone had flipped off the stars. Swornexus had moved. A living tide, the hive mind's neural mass flooded through the Signaris expanse, overwhelming Drax Confederacy defense lines in under a day. Their approach was not a march. It was a ripple through space, cascading in all directions with terrifying coordination. Ships, defense satellites, even orbital stations, each was swarmed and silenced. And unlike other wars, there were no survivors to report what came next. Admiral Draven's early recon logs captured fragments, flickers of shadow moving inside wrecked hulls, tendrils twitching with electric static, data cores melted from the inside out. High Chancellor Lysara called it a neural override on a planetary scale. But even that was an understatement. Entire command chains dissolved. Battle-tested admirals froze mid-orders. AI systems began rerouting themselves in spirals, locking out their crews. The Galaxium Council's warnet crashed not from attack, but from the sheer volume of emergency requests, all shouting the same word: retreat. The 7th War Assembly ordered fallback to Line Sigma. That line held for 11 minutes. By the second cycle, 3 more systems had fallen. Hexer Sovereignty's flagship, Bringer of Order, vanished without distress. Proxy defense algorithms began interpreting gravity wells as friendly signatures, then started guiding enemy vessels directly into planetary cores. The worst part wasn't the speed. It was the certainty. Swornexus didn't conquer. It consumed. And worse, it adapted. Every new system they touched, they learned. Every failure, they evolved. Within 2 cycles, simulations projected complete loss of council space in under 50 days. There was no known counter-strategy. No unification protocol. No single species had the capacity to outthink a hive mind that reprogrammed its own thoughts in real time. Stradigar Varnex whispered it in the war chamber first. "We're not fighting a fleet. We're fighting consensus." And the galaxy trembled. Civilizations debated evacuation. Others proposed sacrifice. A few, quietly, prepared final contingency devices buried beneath homeworld crusts. But none of them predicted what would happen next. Not when 3 unmarked Terran civilian vessels exited Slipstream, just outside the Swornexus core formation, and asked to make a delivery. No one summoned them. No distress beacon was aimed their way. Yet there they were. 3 Terran civilian freighters, unarmed, unescorted, and painted in garish neon colors, emerged from Slipstream at the very edge of the Swornexus assault front. They didn't dodge patrol routes or attempt stealth landings. They parked. One ship broadcast smooth jazz. Another emitted bursts of colored fog for reasons still unknown. The third, oddly, announced in unified galactic. Delivery for party of everyone. It caused chaos within the Galaxium Council's tactical feeds. High-ranking analysts scrambled to verify their credentials. None were military. All were registered under independent cargo guilds. Their manifest listed psychosocial payloads, non-volatile, mimetic-grade entertainment. Swornexus didn't respond with aggression. They hesitated. It was the first hesitation they had shown since their campaign began. Then, the Terrans sent the packet. Encoded in ancient HTML, riddled with obsolete emoji and file types long thought extinct, the packet contained what might be considered the most reckless transmission in galactic diplomatic history. The complete data archive of Terran pop culture. Sitcoms, soap operas, cooking shows, high school dramas, unboxing videos, arguments between strangers in parking lots. A 12-season show titled Detective Dog, Paw and Order with 3D rendered beagles solving crimes. The file was massive, too massive to process in one burst. So the Swornexus paused, not for minutes, for days. Sensors showed no movement across the high front. Their neural web lit up in spirals, flickering with chaotic resonance patterns. Something was happening, something strange. When pressed for explanation, one of the Terran captains simply said, "Well, we figure they've seen war. Let's show 'em reruns." Stradigar Varnex reportedly screamed into a pillow for 9 minutes straight. The galaxy watched in disbelief as Swornexus, once an unstoppable wave, now hovered in orbit like a confused teenager trying to understand Terran dating shows. No one knew what was happening. Not yet, but something had broken, and it started with a laugh track. At first, analysts assumed it was a delay in processing. Swornexus was, after all, a hive intelligence stretched across thousands of nodes. But by the second planetary cycle, it became clear. This wasn't hesitation. This was neurological distress. Swornexus had no concept of fiction, no baseline to understand sarcasm, irony, or metaphor. To them, every byte of data was interpreted as literal fact. Every stage drama, every cooking competition, every melodramatic breakup on a Terran beach was fed directly into their neural lattice as truth. Within the hive's shared mind space, Detective Dog was a real investigator. The Cardassia Tribunal from Real Queens of Quadrant 4 became a new political faction to monitor. And Terran children dancing in digital shorts were misclassified as combat training rituals. They attempted to adapt, to structure, to comprehend, but there was no pattern, no resolution. Each episode contradicted the last. Characters changed actors without explanation. Villains became heroes after musical numbers. Plotlines were recycled or abandoned. Whole seasons of content existed just to sell flavored water. It shattered them. Swornexus Central Intelligence began replicating memes inside its own command signals. Subhives tried to reenact Top Galactic Chef using nutrient paste and enemy prisoners. Others began broadcasting their own serialized content across frequencies meant for tactical orders. A battalion on the Outer Rim refused to move, claiming it was mid-season cliffhanger. And then came the sound, an ambient hum, rising from their ships, vibrating through communication arrays. Not a weapon, not a language, a laugh track, looped, unbroken. By the fifth day, their fleet formations collapsed entirely. Ships hovered at strange angles, refusing synchronization. Some began playing synchronized reruns. Others just floated, twitching as if unsure whether to cry, attack, or binge-watch. Admiral Draven, watching from a command post on Signaris, muttered to himself, "We didn't break their fleet. We broke their sense of reality." Across the galaxy, terrified whispers turned to stunned silence. It wasn't war that halted Swornexus. It wasn't firepower, strategy, or diplomacy. It was chaos. Specifically, Terran chaos, weaponized nonsense, unfiltered and delivered at full bandwidth. And as the hive crumbled under the weight of infinite contradictions, one message echoed across Galaxium channels. Protocol Umbra remains in effect. Do not engage the chair. The aftermath of the Swornexus collapse wasn't met with fanfare or parades. It was met with silence. Across the Council's vast halls, delegates stood frozen, eyes fixed on the live feed of the once formidable hive fleet, now a scattered patchwork of idle vessels, drifting like leaves in the void. Some still emitted traces of Terran reality TV themes. One looped a cooking segment so persistently that even enemy comms began memorizing spice ratios. For all their calculations, protocols, and centuries of war doctrine, no species in the Galaxium Council had ever prepared for this. A cultural implosion. High Chancellor Lysara finally spoke in the War Assembly Chamber, her voice quiet but unwavering. We overestimated the importance of force. We underestimated confusion. Supreme Stradigar Varnex, once the most vocal critic of the empty chair, stood motionless beside it. For the first time, he didn't challenge its presence, didn't mock its symbolism. He simply looked at it, with something between respect and awe. The Council voted unanimously that day. Protocol Umbra would not only remain in place, it would be codified into galactic law. The empty chair would stand indefinitely, not just as a placeholder, not as a myth, but as a reminder that somewhere, out there, existed a people who could shatter a galactic threat without lifting a weapon, whose greatest strategic asset was the unpredictable absurdity of being Terran. Every council meeting after that included a pause, a silence, and a glance toward the chair that saved them all. The chamber was nearly empty. War had been averted. Swornexus had retreated, if retreat was even the right word for a collapse caused by binge-watching Terran chaos. Debriefings were underway, fleets stood down, and the galactic markets were beginning to stabilize. But in the core of the Galaxium Council, the chairs still sat, unoccupied, untouched, watching. Envoy Kirill, young and idealistic, broke the silence that lingered in the room. Do you think we'll ever understand them? The question was simple, but it carried centuries of frustration, confusion, and awe. It wasn't just about Terrans anymore. It was about the unquantifiable, the element of existence no data set could explain, no strategy could predict. High Chancellor Lysara didn't answer immediately. She walked toward the chair, hands folded behind her back, eyes distant with memory. She had seen wars won with plasma and lost with words. She had seen civilizations erased in silence, and others rise on nothing but hope. She placed one hand on the armrest of the chair, the one left empty for those no one could comprehend. No, she finally said, soft but certain. And that is exactly why they matter. The lights dimmed slightly as the council's systems powered down for the cycle. Outside, thousands of stars blinked in slow rotation, indifferent to policy, strategy, or protocol. But inside that chamber, something had shifted. No longer was the empty chair a warning. It had become a promise that no matter how vast the galaxy grew, no matter how advanced or united the council became, it would always leave space for the unknowable, for the wild, for the human. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If this story made you feel something, even just a little, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, or sharing it with someone you love. More stories are on the way, and I'll be right here, ready to tell the next one whenever you're ready to listen.